my website, tortuganwordpress.com, Troubles in Paradise. Another week of Evolution Hour with some guests. Scientist Mel, thank you for hosting. Jackson Wheat, we will be splurging with some discussion of the impending volume 1 of the new book. TD Lane is here to offer TD Lane-ish things, and we may have some other guests as the case may be. It's been a busy week finishing up the book. I'll give a reprise on that after a little bit. We'll dive into the exciting part, the continuing the perpetual contested bones analysis, where we find two creationists from 2017 trying to demolish human evolution by the old tried and true method of misrepresenting their primary source field. The numbers are staying fairly consistent on them. About half of their technical literature they're misrepresenting, and we'll have an example of yet another one today because they brought up ALUs, my favorite little piece of our organism, which are retrotransposons that have a copy me signal that is the reason why there's 1.4 million of them in our genome and counting. About 200 every generation are adding on, and most of the time they do absolutely nothing because they don't have a readme signal. But once in a while, they can mutate into a README signal, which can occasionally be useful, or most of the time dangerous because it's gumming up proteins and all that kind of stuff. Now, guess what option Rupe and Sanford take? Which is to say, A, there's a lot of them, and B, they are essential for life. They are not junk. They are wonderful and sweet. Except the paper they cited as their one and only source for that documentation, Gallet-Levmayor's 2008 paper on intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing, said specifically, this and the finding of de novo ALU insertions that affect splicing imply that this is an ongoing evolutionary process which may result in novel transcripts that are deleterious and inflict genetic diseases. On the other hand, a shift in the splicing pattern from constitutive to alternative might be advantageous in some cases and could enable testing new mRNA, RNA options without eliminating the old ones, which is exactly the point, is that the odds are any mutations of that type are going to be gumming things up. And if you're going to attribute ALUs to design, this means you have to attribute all of them to design. And that's the issue they circumvent by just ignoring it. They never mentioned that ALU is a retrotransposon. They never cite any indication that there is a discouraging word out there in ALU land. It's exactly the same problem that Jonathan Wells did in the Junk DNA book that I discuss in Evolution Slam Dunk, which if you do not have that, remedy that today. Give the old RJ another boost of royalties for the trickle on that. Because this is an area that is one of those litmus test items. I'm a great believer in litmus tests in the sense that you have an example that you know really well, that you know what their arguments are and what the evidence is, and you can just squeeze the creationist in between with them. And ALU is one of those because so little of it ever gets discussed in the anti-evolution literature. The reptile-mammal transition is another one. There are a bunch of them that we'll be going into in the new book, the cliches of polystrate fossils and vestigial organs and all the rest. So we can give everybody an update then, Jackson, on where we are in the thing. The text is finished for volume 1. I'm just completing up an appendix on amino acid associations, which is an origins of life issue that is also a matter of where Paul Nelson, who is the creationist but operates in the intelligent design camp without mentioning too much that he's a young earth creationist, and we dismantle in detail when he collaborated with Richard Buggs fairly recently with a weird paper on orphan genes that I think both of us were amazed at how obtuse it was in terms of misrepresenting the source material. So this book which is going into count them, 4 Answers in Genesis books. The rocks were there. We're hitting ground that no one's hit before. And I'm really delighted at how much stuff that we've been able to accumulate on this. It looks like we got about 3,000 references in the whole thing so far. As a matter of fact, it's funny. that our bibliography is going to be as big as some anti-evolutionist books. Hey, if they're going to be hunting onto our field, they're going to have an awful lot they're going to have to catch up with. So we're just in the matter of tidying up all that. We got to get all the stuff in the finished master text, and then I need to complete the index to get that out of the way. So cross fingers. In February, we will have the thing out. Plus, Jackson, you got to get your picture. Got to get your picture so that you can, we have our little mugs on the back end. They don't need to be flattering. I'm the standard of unflattering. So you have a low bar to get over. It only needs to be a picture. And that way we got the whole thing covered. And then we'll work out what kind of graphics and stuff that we can deal with in terms of Create Space. And then there will be book 2. And then in 2020, then we will be diving back into the field to get the other half, which will be about the same size book, I suspect. In retrospect, it will touch on a lot of areas, because we're going to be going into tetrapod origins and human evolution stuff and the flood mythology, and there'll be oodles on Black Sea flooding and all the kinds of stuff that connects up to that area, and just whack-a-loom things on Noah's Ark. And there will be cosmic discussions about the Big Bang and nuclear synthesis in stars. And there's just going to be a lot that we've now shunted out to the second volume, and that'll make a wonderful companion piece that you can use to squeeze every young Earth creationist that you encountered together on. It's been a delightful process. TD Lane, since you've read or in the process of reading Evolution Slam Dunk, you can give us a little bit of a reaction about what you think about my wee little tome on that.
Well, I haven't read. I was reading actually about an hour ago, but I haven't gone very much recently because sick. But honestly, how do they avoid the data so well?
Yeah, that's the thing that I want to have as the wonderful take home, and I think the reason why source methods is so useful, because unlike just the Aaron Ra, boy, you're stupid, and here's the reason why from our phylogeny challenge, and we've got you obliterated on the data level. It doesn't tell you how do they do that in their heads. Well, you can't get inside, but through their source methods, what they discuss, what they don't, you can peel away a bit of the hood and see some of the little gears going on down the way. That when somebody is going out of their way to bring up source material that blows their argument to smithereens, you got to say this is something about how their brains are working. Either they're so obtuse that they literally don't see it, which is a one option that's very probable, that when you're an apologist, you're looking for ammunition. And if you find a little quote snippet that fits what you want, or worse, as both Jackson and I have encountered over and over and over again, the quote miner who reads the quote, oh, this is what Darwin said, and I got this from a quote mine, and I have never read a damn thing of Darwin other than that little quote. The moment you have a mind that can do that easily, they're plopped off the map. A few of them are ones that are actually striving to be honest, and they're getting into a mess on the details of the flood geology and systematics. And so you get in these little hissy fits that are going between Answers in Genesis and ICR types over baraminology as to whether Heracitherium is part of the horse monobaramin. All of these buzzwords you're going to learn all about in the new book. You're going to learn so many things. You'll be able to talk about monobaramins and holobaramins and baramins and all the cute little things and what's the difference between polystrate fossils and reality. And you'll find out about how giant blobs of rock can in fact move, and how floods can actually happen in reality, not the mythical flood version. And you'll learn more about the weirder little critters, like little wasp casings that demonstrate what is it? What kind of fly casings or whatever it is that's just layer on layer on layer on layer of them in the Green River that just blows to smithereens the flood model.
Oh, yes. Those are the Ephemeroptera craft. Why can't I remember the technical name and not the regular name? Caddis flies. Caddis flies. There we go.
Caddis flies. Yeah. It's the things that the data is literally under their noses, if they bothered to read the technical literature. And the problem is that the moment they cite technical literature, they're on a source methods turf. Now, there are going to be an awful lot of people that won't have the time or inclination to go boring around in this. But if you look at how Jackson has been doing it, I've been doing it, Pelogi has been doing it, there's so many different people who will go after creationists and intelligent design anti-evolutionists, and we're doing it from a source methods direction. Vice Rhino is the same way, that you say, do they present an argument with sources or not? If they're just presenting boilerplate, is meaningless. But the moment they step onto a source turf, aha, now we can take a look. And can you track the source down? Is it a recent source? Is it a representative source? Has the source changed their opinion in the meantime? Has new information come along that alters that? All of those instantly come into play. And it's the same technique that you use when you're examining a politician making a claim about trade policy or a issue about anything in science or history. It's exactly the same method. And you'll find that people who suffer from cranial blockage of the rectum have, as a core problem, an inability to process sources reliably. We're seeing it exactly today with Jay Sekulow, who is a creationist, Pat Robertson guy, who's part of the lawyer team for the President of the United States. And do you think for a moment he's using any different method to do that defense than he was when he was defending a young earth creationist in law back in the 1990s? The one and only case the ACLJ ever took on evolution, and they lost miserably, and they've never taken one since. It's a fascinating phenomenon. I think it's either DeHart or Levesque. I think it's the DeHart case. I discuss it in the tip thing. You can check it out at the website. Anyway, so we're being a juggling act of doing all of the stuff to keep up with all the different processes. But the first volume of The Rocks Were There is just about done. And I think it's going to be a pretty beautiful thing. It'll be a useful resource in terms of the sources that we pulled together on so many different subjects on feathered theropods and the listings of Lagerstätten and mass extinctions. And our tables will have the sources that you can look up directly, so you don't have to go plowing around for it. We want people to follow up on their own. And we want anybody that has any particular interest in any of the topics to go, oh, I've always wondered where I can find that. Bloop. And there they'll have it right, easily accessible. And then also the idea that they're going to find a whole bunch of shit that, holy moly, I didn't know about that. That will be some new things. It's not as though it wasn't there at all, but so much of this stuff is buried in lots of little corners all over the place. And by pulling them all together, we're acting as a clearinghouse on a scale that I think will be absolutely thrilling to have. We want to have this on everybody's bloody shelf because we've done some stuff nobody's done before. Whee! Anyway, it'll be fun. You can read that in Tronic ALU's paper on alternative splicing because it's a fascinating subject, and you can remember ALUs as a handy little a blip. I'll point out that the other half of the show will be relating to Paul Nelson and his hijinks. We discuss him. For those of you who are not aware of Paul Nelson, if you Google him, and I'll type out the little thing on him, Paul Nelson ostensibly is an intelligent design advocate. He's one of the big leaguers in the intelligent design movement. But he's also a young earth creationist. And he's an amiable one, and he thinks we shouldn't be dividing over that issue, we being the anti-evolutionists. But it also means that he avoids bringing up that he's a young earth creationist. And universally, the people who are in the intelligent design movement do not go out of their way to mention that. They do exactly the same thing with David Capage. He's routinely passed off as an intelligent design advocate. Nope, he's a young earth creationist. And that's telling you something. Well, Nelson popped up particularly on our scope in relation to the orphan gene matter, which is genes that do not have any seemingly apparent homologue with other genes, and therefore, how did they come about? Well, there's actually mechanisms for how these things come about. There's all sorts of physical reasons in terms of how you detect homology between things. For example, if you have a gene in an organism that's come in by lateral gene transfer from a parasite, well, duh, it's not going to show, or bacterial things that are being injected into metazoans. No wonder it doesn't have a homology, because it's borrowed and it's coming in a completely different direction. So there's a bunch of little details on there. But what amazed us about Nelson's collaboration with Richard Buggs, who is a vague, semi-intelligent designer. It's very difficult to tell quite what he thinks yet. And I'm not sure whether he's going to fall into a more amiable version of James Cole, or whether he's going to be in a more amiable version of Michael Denton. The spectrum of people who do all sorts of detail-y things, but it's hard to figure out what they think. And that's skewing up on that third problem in the Tortucan detector kit, which is, what do they think happened? The object of all models is to explain what you think happened. And, if you want to come up with a young Earth creationist or intelligent design model, if you want to call it design, fine. What was designed? When was it designed? All of that. And Nelson is very vague on these things. So basically, it's a cast doubt fog bank of authority quotes and bliplets to make you worry about the air quotes Darwinian model without you ever quite knowing what their model is. And so that's a basic methods question that everybody should be able to deal with. Anybody can ask me. In fact, James Cole just today in the tweet exchange, he says, well, what do you think? What is your explanation? What do you believe? Let's go natural common descent driven by natural mutations in proteins, cis-regulatory and epigenetic circumstances, funneled through selection mechanisms, natural sexual selection. There. You can say it in a tweet.
Scientific way.
Yeah, in a tweet. And so I've been asking him constantly. He happened to lob a website, his own website, where he put up a posting from somebody on the Darwinian code thing. And it is not necessarily an anti-evolutionist. As usual with Cole, it's hard to tell why he trolls what he does. But the point is, along the way, they happen to mention Homo erectus. And so I've been asking Cole, okay, apply your model. Tell me, when do you think Homo erectus first lived? And are they relatives of us or not? Apply your model. And he just won't answer. I cannot believe he doesn't have an opinion on this. And if he's a doctrinal young Earth creationist, it's going to be Homo erectus lived when he was created by God 6,000 years ago and died out at some point, don't ask me anymore, and that they are not related to us because nothing is related to us. That's what a doctrinal young Earth creationist would have. Now, if he has a view other than that, fine, offer it. But instead, he just prattles on and on and on and on about light waves and God created light and all of that. And therefore, anything, since light does stuff, there are photosynthetic organisms, there are reactions that go on because of light, duh. Radiation does stuff, duh. And so he treats that as like an instantaneous measure that Genesis is correct. and you're going, is that the same Genesis that wouldn't ban slavery, and the same one that had the sun and the moon and the stars made after plants and the earth? Is that the one we're talking about? And he avoids running into that again. So I at least have a better time of it with an honest creationist or an honest intelligent designer that actually knows what it is they think and is willing to progress to the data field. That's the pitfall. Because Jackson, you've known exactly the same problem, that when you ask people to apply their model to data outside of their little box, they go silent because they can't apply it to anything. You've noticed that with Standing for Truth and others. It's the most amazing phenomenon. It's an absolutely consistent phenomenon.
The guy we just did a video about recently, long story short, when I had my live conversation with him, I asked him at one point if he thought species within this one genus were related to each other, to which his response was, I don't know.
And he's never going to be curious about it. We tried to drag him kicking and screaming to a source methods analysis of fact check what you've been reading. Fact check Stephen Meyer. Fact check all of that. And where did he go? that new video that he just did that you wrote did the
Wells.
commentary, he's right back to the same addiction that he was before. He's simply repeating stuff he's never fact checked.
It's we've been exchanging emails recently, and he asked me about the whale sequence, which I can already imagine where he's going with it. But he tossed a paper at me, written by mathematicians for geneticists. It's basically how long it takes for mutations to accrue and things like that. Perfectly fine paper. It seemed it had been well cited, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he said, and interestingly, so I looked up the paper. Of course, it had been cited by Michael Behe. So
Bingo.
He wasn't looking for the paper because he had just been doing research and happened across it. No, he's Michael Behe had written a post about it, and then that's how he fixed. And I highly doubt, because I am not proficient enough at math to be able to check their results, and so I doubt he is either.
Well, this is an important call out for everybody. Remember, one of the things I do in my TIP project is I keep track of and catalog all the technical citations that anti-evolutionists do, which is why I have this great big bloody spreadsheet that has 60,000 sources in it and 9,000 anti-evolution works and 27,000 technical papers. And I mark down source by source by source as I catalog them, whether they are cited by an anti-evolutionist or not. And so often as not, then when I'm jousting with creationists and they lob a technical paper at me, I will then look up to see in my spreadsheet, oh, there's a black box. It's been cited by an anti-evolutionist. That's why they're bringing it up. Not because they encountered it on their own, but because they've trawled a secondary source quote mine and they're trying to sound sciencey by offering the technical citation as if they had read it themselves. I know exactly how stupid that is, because when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I would do exactly the same thing.
Well, he did that for the cytochrome B and C papers that he lobbed, well, because Jonathan Wells had done it and he hadn't fact checked him on it.
Yeah. So. And so the one lesson that you learn from source fact checking anti-evolutionists is you don't trust them. And you don't have to trust scientists either. The point is that when you look up source citation usage by regular real scientists that are not cheating and being ideologues, you'll find that if it says point X, the paper actually confirms that it does point X, and there's nothing in those papers that are not conflicting with the point they're trying to raise. Otherwise, they should have mentioned it. And anybody that violates those rules, usually it won't even make it to the peer review process. Sometimes then you can find stuff that will flip through because they'll find congenial journals that will publish it for them. So you always are very suspicious when somebody's paper is in the obscure journal of something or other from Upper Slobovia that has really loose standards of things or hasn't been cited very much. That's another factor. So those are all scholarly heuristics that you have to go through. But that secondary quote addiction is just a pathology of behavior. Again, another thing I'm measuring is that any source that does anti-evolution arguments, if they're citing a technical paper, they are listed in one category versus another. And anybody that is citing a material that is stuff that where they're the fact claimants, that's in another category. And so we have a listing of the fact claimants of anti-evolutionism, which is about 60 some odd people, which is a ludicrously small group compared to the 60,000 scientists who have written the technical papers that I'm directly familiar with because they're stuff that I've been doing in my research.
Practically every scientist.
Yeah. And so and then you can look at impact as well. You just try to act one that's a really useful one for me. And if you're into dinosaurs or any paleontology whatsoever, this is one you can have as a take-home point. Just ask the creationist, name any discovery in the last 100 years in paleontology that was due to anti-evolutionists. And it's like nothing, literally. They have contributed zip. It's not as though you don't have an occasional anti-evolutionist with paleontology cred like Wise, but he ain't contributing anything notable. No discoveries, no insights. And you look at the ones that actually are from Michael Benton and Paul Sereno in the dinosaur world, Michael Benton in mammal paleontology, Christine Janis, and all these other, you can tell because they're discussing a ton of stuff and details and pulling everything together. That ain't what Kurt Wise is doing.
We were chatting before the show, because we do that, about actually Whitmore's paper, which was peer reviewed and did go into an actual journal. He is a creationist, but he did get the paper through, which had nothing to do with creationism, but he got it through, and even still, it was harshly criticized, because even the conclusions that he was drawing were still nonsense. They weren't fitting with the data.
Yeah, well, there's only goes so far, and that's the other bit about the fact that if something is 15, 20 years old, some work is seminal and in areas where they don't really bother about constantly replicating the wheel over and over again. And so you have some older papers that can done, but yet you still find people that are applying it in new contexts, like iridium layers. The original thing would be Alvarez's stuff way back in the 1970s or 80s. It's a long time ago. But there's been work done since. And so you can connect it up into larger contexts. It's always suspicious when you find somebody who is a source dangler, but they're very selective about their source dangling. And you determine that, Jackson, you've had delightful times, as I have, by asking the right tactical question to force them to display a deeper knowledge of the subject. And the moment you ask them to apply it to an area where, if they really understood it, they would be able to apply it to that topic, and they can't, that's warning flags and danger, Will Robinson.
They absolutely should. If they're taking one single case and they're saying this confirms our model, and then as soon as you ask them, okay, apply it to the 9,900 other cases, does it still work? And they're not going to do that. So
yeah, Amiga Nut says, should I buy Evolution Slam Dunk? I'm sorry, I'm biased, but yes, you should.
I would agree.
I am genuinely proud of Slam Dunk. And I think that was one of the reasons why Jackson said, hey, we should write a book together, because he knows that I'm not an idiot.
And I read Slam Dunk and I liked it. So yeah.
It's literally a book that you will find this information nowhere else. This is not a thing where you can go, well, I can always use Jerry Coyne's book or Richard Dawkins. Oh, no, you can't. You will not find the information that's in this book anywhere but this book, because I'm the one that wrote the book. That I was the only one that went through and asked the obvious question. One of the strongest macroevolution examples at all is the reptile-mammal transition. It's a killer app. It has none of the squishy areas that are the case with some other really still perfectly powerful examples, bird evolution, whale evolution, there's a whole bunch of those. And the case has gotten better and better for those in the last 20 years. But the reptile-mammal transition is such a spectacular one, and it's us, we are the mammals, that wouldn't you know about it? It bothered me that too few people knew about the bloody little probenognaathids. These little itty bitty fur balls that were predicted. Their double jaw format was predicted in advance on evolutionary grounds exclusively. And it turns out that there really were animals of exactly that transitional character. Well, if it's design, then the designer really loves Robert Broom and evolutionists, because he's going out of his way to make stuff that match evolutionary expectations. And then you say, well, how do the anti-evolutionists deal with this reptile-mammal transition evidence? And suddenly it's crickets. And you find Philip Johnson and Dwayne Gish being virtually the only ones who kind of tiptoe into the area, and then comic relief like Krieger at Creation Wiki. So there's a lot of humor to it, in the fact that creationists seem to be dedicated to being as stupid as possible on this spectacular example. But that is then only a subset of a much bigger field, because tackling young earth creationism, they stomp on so much more than just the narrow little file of the reptile-mammal transition. We're alluding to material that was in Slam Dunk, but we're expanding way beyond it in the new book, because it's so much on geology and phylogenetics and the biology of microorganisms and weird little critters that I didn't know about and that Jackson knew about, and historical examples that Jackson didn't know about that I'm putting into it. And so between the two of us, boy, this has been a delightful learning experience, which I think writing a book should be. That if you if you don't know more when you finish it than you did before, you probably aren't writing a good book. You're just retreading your same stuff. And and that's another advantage to doing this kind of a thing, is that it's constantly upping our game, so that anybody that's thinking to take on the old RJ as of 2016 is going to have to realize that, no, I'm the RJ of 2020, and I have learned even more than I have before. And Jackson, I think you've had exactly the same thing. It's made you a more powerful exponent of evolution because of all the interconnections that have popped up since.
Absolutely. I agree with everything. Yes, I have certainly learned a lot about the Mycenaean salinity crisis, and I learned so much about mutations and things, and about baraminology, and I learned stuff in every chapter. And so, yes, I had a good time.
Yeah. Oh, and I
writing
think
this as
we're going to
well.
be an absolute delightful resource when anybody tries to waive DNA as information.
Guys, look who it is.
Ah,
Better late than never, I suppose.
Cut me a little slack, you guys. It's 33 here, and I fell asleep on my couch under a heated blanket.
perfectly understandable.
You
Although
time-traveling heathen.
even though I'm in Pacific time zone, I'm usually working at 3:30 in the morning here, so I'm a super night owl. So all of that. So introduce yourself as a guest on our program.
RJ, I'm not as powerful as you are. My name is Erica. I go by Gutsy Gibbet on YouTube, and I do videos about anthropology and zoology and paleontology for fun because I love it.
And that's what it should be. That it's
Absolutely.
because it's so bloody neat. It's absolutely fascinating. And you're, spoiler alert, a young person, and I,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, am an old fart. And I marvel at how accessible the information is today, that it's at your
Oh my
fingertips. The technical papers that are just literally a mouse click away. This is the bane of creationists, because the fact that we can track all this stuff down instantly.
It really is. And the thing is even when it's behind a paywall, you can usually still find it. You know?
80, I know for a fact, because
yeah.
I am not made of money, and I will also want to be, oh yeah, speaking of which, let me jump in here very, very
Speaking
briefly
of
to
money.
thank my Patreons.
Speaking of my plug.
Yes, I will do my thing about our patrons. Zeshi, thank you, Zeshi, for helping out again. Zeshi, at a time when they were able to help a little, and then they weren't able to do so, they've come back in as a Patreon at the colleague level, along with Hendril and Eric and Speed of Sound and Zurus. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then our researchers, Travis and Convert Me and Eat Meal and James and Ralph McFadden and Pelagia and Benjamin and Ugly German Truths. And our assistant researchers, Mike Apple and Ian Chen and Duranko and Totis Real. And our friend level, Daniel and Stephen Bauman and Marigale Beddoes, and Insects Are Cool, and Devin Miranda Reeves, and Morton Nielsen, and Puffalovigus, and Bo Hubble Rasmussen, and Staggles, and Alex Jones, and Paul Williams. And then our legacy patrons, Jen and Jody, and John, and Keith, and Andrew, and Dyer, and Yui, and Mona, and Brad, and Daniel, and Yana, and Sun, Skystone, and Everett, and Sewer. Thank you. Every single one of them has made a difference. I'm the one that for a time, I have to decide, okay, do we want ink for the printer or food? And that sort of thing. So now I'm in an easier time, although I am still on Social Security, and I get my material from book royalties, a plug, and as a Patreon account, and I have a GoFundMe account and all of that. And I'm still in scrapey mode. The dryer died, and so I'm going to have to figure about that. I'm going to have to get new glasses probably before I get my license again. I need to get a passport just in case I'm ever invited to speak anywhere.
Oh yeah, I need to get new glasses too. That's a good point.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of
can't
little
see
things,
things
but
again.
nevertheless, I'm able to squeak along at least better. And everyone who's been able to help on that, thank you, thank you, thank you. If anybody has need to get off the fence, think about the fact that Ken Ham pulls down $200,000 a year at Answers in Genesis, and go, can I spare like a latte a month to help RJ? That's the thing. Anyway, back to what after the plugging, all the things have done. Back to the thing. So how did you get into the YouTube angle, and what was kind of the spur on that angle? Because I know it's a jump not only at the technical level, but also you're now out there in front of everybody.
Yeah, honestly, the thing is that I really just genuinely love to talk about things like anthropology and primatology and things like that. And I never really had the confidence to kind of do it until I was like, all right, well, I'm doing this master's program. Like, I at least have a little bit of kind of credibility, so to speak. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. And it started, with similar to how many people do with creationism videos, which is like the all right,
The
could dinosaurs
low-hanging
live
fruit.
yeah, low hanging fruit. And
Although from a source methods angle, it is endlessly useful
it's
because
fair.
especially the young Earth creationists stomp on so many different areas that it's an opportunity to learn about practically everything in the universe and history because some creationist has stepped over it.
Well, and it makes you feel really good about, I'm writing a project proposal right now, so I've got like 1,000 sources, like a billion tabs open, and it makes me feel really good that a hundredth of that effort tends to outdo the average creationist when it comes to researching for anything.
Yeah.
Because
The main lesson that I want to have also is the power of interconnectivity between people. That too many people come into this, oh gosh, creationism is stupid. I'm going to reinvent the wheel and discover everything I can entirely on my own, and forgetting the fact that no, there's been a ton of work already done.
Right.
To where now what you want to do is to be able to connect up to that block and then use your time wisely to be able to explore the edge. So the idea, my delightful goal is that no creationist will be able to poke their head up out of their hole without somebody somewhere being way ahead of them, to where they jump in real time, whether they're in debates or any other context, and say, this is why you're wrong. Here's the direct source on that. How dare you be so stupid for 2020? There's no excuse for that kind of thing, rather than months after the fact coming along and fixing it.
You're right, and the thing is that this is the kind of thing that really thrives on misinformation.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so easy to gish gallop and name 10 things that are just completely incorrect, take 20 minutes to correct, and then kind of hit and run.
Yeah, and now, because so many of them are in fact on YouTube, we now have the public media that nobody had before. Dwayne Gish would go to give one of his lectures, and some people that would be our counterparts in 1980 physically had to be in the room and watch him say the stupid, and then they would ask him a question and he would dissemble, and then he would say, well, I won't, I agree, you're right, we won't go into that again. And then he would go down to the next lecture and repeat the same crap. And unless you followed him, you wouldn't know that. Well, now they're doing it on YouTube. So everybody can come in directly and fact check and comment on and put the thumbs down and all of that real time.
In instant busting. Yeah, I have
as you just recently did.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Which one? Standing for truth.
Please do.
Standing for truth.
Oh, the snark off.
Oh, that killed me. And the thing is that it's my own fault, because I'd had this conversation about the tracheless trackway, the trackway, so to speak, with a creationist coworker years ago. And so when he brought it up, I was like, oh, I remember that trackway. It's total bunk. I mean, you won't find an anthropologist out there who of any breed who's going to give those any credence, and so I started talking because I was so confident. I remember speaking about it, but I said there was one print instead of multiple. And so I was like, I just gave him something to latch onto. It doesn't change the fact that there are there are two hominid footprint and primate locomotion experts who all they do all day is hominid locomotion and hominid footprints. We're talking about
it's reached the stage now where they have computer models where they're able to work at it at the muscle attachment level.
Yeah, these are guys who argue over whether or not the importance of like individual aspects of the foot, like how important the longitudinal arch is, or transverse sesamoid complex,
which they can detect. in the pressure patterns that are occurring in the actual footprints.
Precisely. And the funny thing is that they get away with these specific images, and no shade on Gerlinsky or anything like that, but he's a Mesozoic dinosaur guy, so he sees this kind of something that looks even remotely like a trackway. He's like, it's hominid prints, but he knows nothing about bipedal locomotion in primates, which is very specific because it involves this toe off across the midsection of the foot and rigidity.
The longest section of the little info boxes that we have in our book, nice little gray subsection things. The one that runs across 3 pages is on the Paluxy man tracks and all of the associated stuff of there. My favorite one is the one where I can't remember the name for the Stelly thing, but it's supposedly a guy with a sandal squashed a trilobite.
Oh yes.
And the Moab.
I know what you're talking about.
And the thing is I love the comment that somebody made on it that deep ocean is an unusual habitat for a single sandal wearer back in the antediluvian time.
Or what was the Burdick print where it's got like the dinosaur, the obviously fake dinosaur track, and then like a human footprint on top of that, and someone wrote a comment on it that said like this human dancing one-legged under a dinosaur.
And even if you see the Laetoli prints, if you look close, you can see that little toe, the equivalent of your thumb, is sticking out rather more than you find in living humans.
Oh yeah, because the thing is that with and I had to kind of refamiliarize myself with a lot of the terminology, but the thing is an adducted halix is not the final.
Oh, you jargon person, you.
Yeah. Listen, I learned it. I'm gonna brag about it now. But it's not the main thing that you have to be bipedal. The adducted halix comes with terrestriality, which makes sense. You have primate coming down from the trees into the savanna, and then it stands up and starts walking for whatever reason, for whatever pressure, begins walking on 2 legs, and then you've got rigid midfoot and longitudinal arch. And
a lot of it comes from the thing, and I thank Jackson for coming up with a beautiful term, monocausism. The obsession with the this or the that thing. This was the case with bird evolution, where there was a long, really acrimonious debate over ground up versus trees down flight model, where it turns out both of them were right. And likewise with the notion that you're talking about the terrestrial biped versus the tree climber. Well, can't you do both?
Right. Yeah, it's or the same with the Cambrian explosion. Well, it was just oxygen, or it was just predators, or it was. It's like, no, it was all of them.
I just listened to a podcast. It was the Common Descent podcast yesterday while I was working out on the Devonian and the Devonian mass extinction, and basically how it was seriously like 10 things, some of which were related, some of which just weren't. And just occurred in succession to the point that you get this enormous mass extinction, like the Kesswater event and things like that. And I was like, wow, how unlucky. And sometimes that's just it's as simple as that,
That's why
everything going wrong in the exact way it needs to go wrong.
It was
it's the Titanic syndrome. It's the thing of where it was just one bad thing too many, all piling up.
Yes.
And the thing, though, that we made a big deal about in the new book has to do with the mass extinctions, because who was it that we brought up? Was it Snelling or whatever that was making a big deal out of mass extinctions?
Probably Snelling.
Yes, because it's they're all at the same time, and they're all contributing to the fluid and all that.
Most of the mass extinctions are related to magmatic province super eruptions.
Yeah, at least in some way.
Yeah, and so the asteroid impact for the Cretaceous was just one more bad thing on top of an already destabilized ecosystem because of the Deccan traps in India. And so we're trying to pull together so much of the cutting edge material on the technical literature. Some of our most recent sources are, drumroll, from 2020. So it's going to be a very current book, as the same thing was with Slamdown, that we have an advantage with at least the self-publishing mode, that the slow as molasses editorial process that you get in conventional publication, we can bypass that and have things accurate. We vet our material. We got our. I was delighted with our geologists reading through our geology chapters that we made no errors. There were just a few little tweaks every once in a while,
Sure.
and it's because we're bloody careful.
Well,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's, wouldn't you know it, when you know you're going to be peer reviewed, you tend to be careful.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I've got the scholarly angle. How is this going to be potentially manipulated by a creationist? So any possible chink in the armor, I want to be 10 steps ahead of them, like chess playing, to where I'm going, oh, you're not going to get me on this one. I'm carefully constructing this argument so that you can't use that argument because I know what you do.
You're just waiting for it too. You know,
Yeah.
you're just, I mean, in my on Modern Day Debate conversation with Standing for Truth, you know, he starts pulling
I'm
up
sorry.
conversations. I know. It was, you know, it was enjoyable. And Standing is, you know, he's a nice guy. He starts talking about Laetoli though, and how Mary Leakey comments that the Laetoli prints are indeed very human-like. And I'm like, hold on just a second.
Authority quoting.
Yeah, I'm like, hold on just a second. Why are you saying that? Because if you're about to go the route that these are what anatomically modern human prints, we need to have a conversation.
Oh, I'll tell you why he said that, because his creationist sources said that.
Exactly. Right.
Not because he's actually read any of this stuff. That's the whole fun. Did you happen to see the debate I had with Standing on the dinosaurs and humans beings together?
I did. And actually, I was reminded of that when I was researching for that Trachilus video, because I remembered you saying, okay, tell me where that book was published, who published it. And there was a long pause.
Oh, it was like pulling teeth to get him to tell what his source was.
He didn't want to say.
The guy who wrote that book, Vance Nelson, is the sole source for the jade Montana ceratops. That meme originates with him.
It's a terrible source. And there the point is that one of the things that I've determined is one of the common features of anti-evolutionism is there's a secondary source addiction. I don't have to guess at this. I'm literally measuring it. Another reason, plug for supporting the project, because I'm doing this kind of work. Not even the NCSE is doing work on this. I can tell you as an observation that 95% of 9,500 anti-evolutionists, or of 2,300 anti-evolutionists that I'm tracking, do not cite primary source literature at all. It's purely secondary.
It's completely anecdotal, but that has been my experience as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely routine. And you'll find that when you move outside of creationism camp to other people who suffer from cranial blockage of the rectum, that they also are doing exactly the same thing. That if you look at our geocentrists or moon landing hoax deniers or anything like that, they're using exactly the same secondary addiction. Flat earthers are another extreme case. And so there's a madness to their method, to paraphrase Hamlet.
And there's a lot of arguments from authority. Like, my favorite thing is this, and Jackson, I'm not sure if we talked about this or if I brought this up in another juncture, but there's this desire to say, it's this weird paradoxical thing where it's like, if a scientist is of our camp, of the very small camp that we have, their expertise is unquestionable, and they can speak outside their field constantly.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that, because the people like Standing are it's hard to like say, they're stenographers. You know, they're going to copy absolutely everything, and it doesn't matter if it's a geneticist talking about astronomy. We're going to take his word as gospel truth because he's our guy.
Yeah,
ethical cherry picking.
That's another diagnostic tool that you can use when somebody is a parasitical citer. They can't get beyond the exact detail. So if they are prone to offering jargon, you then probe to see, do they actually understand what the jargon means?
Oh, yeah. I had a conversation with an intelligent designer who was, because I commented on Fazal Rana's post that the Cambrian explosion was 2 to 3 million years long, instead of, which even the lowest estimates put it at 5, not 2 to 3, but it's accepted to be upwards of 25 million years. And some guy started chatting with me about it, and he really didn't know anything about the Cambrian or geology or paleontology or evolutionary biology. Long list.
And that's why there's a good question on that. One of the ones I've been itching to have a debate with somebody on the Cambrian explosion.
Me too. That'd be a lot of fun.
Although I don't shy from it at all. But there was a fellow. This was the daisy chain here. Casey Luskin, late of the Discovery Institute, had a little spiel at a local church in Seattle that I was able to attend. Rare for them, it didn't charge. so that it was free to the public. And so I went, this was like, I think 2013, somewhere around in there. And I was meeting with the various people down below before the lecture started. And there was a fellow who obviously had seen a Steve Meyer lecture, and he was just oogly boogly with enthusiasm. Oh, the Cambrian explosion is such a big problem. And I was starting to ask him about the details of the Cambrian explosion, like what animals were there, what was the environment like, and all that. And of course, he had no clue, because
Weird fishy worms.
none of
fish
their
worms.
sources ever explain what actually is happening. They're just dropping
Yeah.
quotes and
You're
terminology
right.
without ever putting it into context. So the other one that I have, we have a, you'll love this, Erica. We've gone through, we have a complete listing of the animal phyla in the book with the sources referring to them. And it's broken down in two models. One is just the easy alphabetical, and it's showing graphically how early they are in the fossil record between
Right.
actual fossils versus problematic trace fossils,
Sure.
and how so many of them don't have that. And then another version of the charts are broken down phylogenetically. So we have the protostomes and the deuterostomes, and that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. There's only 3 deuterostome phyla. Almost all of the life on Earth are protostomes in terms of phyla or organism species.
God likes his
Bugs
beetles.
rule.
Loves them. And trilobites. I remember the first time someone was telling me about the radiation of trilobites and how many trilobites there
It's
really
like 20,000 species.
Oh, good Lord, they're enormously diverse.
that's
And we even make a mention of the fact that some one creation, I think it was Snelling again, who argued that the trilobites were smooth and therefore could easily be rolled like rocks or something in the floodwaters. And going, has he seen many trilobites?
That was
They are
that
not
was,
smooth.
That was probably Snelling, because he does like the whole hydrologic sorting arguments.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's a super trilobite groupie that I follow on Twitter. He's a paleontologist in that area, and I apologize for forgetting his name. It starts with an M. Anyway, he will constantly be putting up photographs of the most extraordinary little trilobites that you find with these weird veins and carapaces and spikes and things out of them. These are really hydrodynamically sortable. Yeah.
I love the idea of the flood rushing in and 3-foot-long trilobites like Isotelix rex are shooting out of the water like cannonballs.
The killer, yes, the killer. Oh, Lisa is asking in the live chat, what do you think of Out of Africa 2? If what we're referring to is the fact that there have been a couple pulses of human breaching out of Africa. So the current model, if my understanding is correct, that's another area where the two models were both right and wrong. Back in the 1970s era, you had this just fist fight between Walpoff and the multi-regionalists versus the Out of Africa one. Well, now that we have the DNA of Denisovans and Neanderthals, and we have way more data field on the scope, we can see that there are indeed pulses, but there's a lot of regional variation that's going on genetically, so that you have demes and avatars popping up and interbreeding and flipping around in all sorts of cases. So it's a much more complex picture on there.
If I remember correctly too, I think the multi-regional had made, I think, I'm not positive on this, like a prediction that interbreeding would go on at some point. And then of course, now we've got, Denisovans and Neanderthals interbreeding.
And here's my old fart mode again. I never dreamed that I would live to a time when people would be casually talking about the haplotypes found in the Neanderthal DNA.
It's cool. It's so cool.
Isn't this just amazing? I mean, if we can get past Trumplandia, the 21st century is going to be just neat.
I had to explain to someone on my, I love to get into, I like to instigate fights with my family members on Facebook. Just
somehow that doesn't surprise me.
It's just enjoyable. And
everyone needs a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when I'm in the mood for discourse and I don't want to go to Twitter.
You're out for blood.
Yeah, I'll just go instigate with my family. And I'm arguing with my uncle about the importance of riparian zones and of wet zones and how vital they are to protecting the Gulf. And because the conversation was, all right, he was like, Trump hasn't done that many things to the environment because he doesn't, accept global climate change. I was like, even if you don't accept global climate change, which is absurd, but even if you don't, look at these bad things that are happening. Have you caught a fish in the center of the Gulf when the eutrophic conditions are going on? I very much doubt it. But you're right. Trumplandia is You know, I
The
hope
Trump administration is the most scientifically illiterate administration in history.
I 100% believe
At the
that.
very
But Erica-
point when we need to have the most scientifically literate administrations in history because we're facing so many challenges. So there's the soapbox moment on that.
Yes,
But
yes, but
on the various ecological
ultimately-
zonations and all these little things, that's a term that pops up in
Snowball.
Andrew Snelling and Kurt Wise and all that. The creationists have this cartoon desire for a pre-flood world that they can never quite figure out. And so we spend time and time again in the new book, pre-plug for the rocks were, the rocks were there, about looking at the actual details from the Green River deposits and the various things that are occurring. My favorite bugaboo that I'm really making a big deal of in the new book is interbedded airborne volcanic ash. This is one of the Achilles heels of young Earth creationism. You can have the big slosh, and that's what we call it, the big slosh,
Right.
that can come in with all these fountains of the deep, and everything's really spectacular, and you see Russell Crowe off in the corner with the boat. I mean, the big spectacle, right?
Rock monsters. Don't
How
forget.
do you get airborne dry ash again and again and again and again, layer after layer after layer after layer? Did the spigots suddenly turn off and everything dry out? Where are the mountains above the water that could cause that to happen? It's hilarious. So they have to push themselves into a corner and declare that all of it's done underwater.
rock salt.
And the same thing. So my soapbox, my geology soapbox, because it's the one I know the most about, is limestone. Because I am absolutely at a loss for how one of the slowest depositing minerals is getting enormous, hundreds of feet thick layers in between the likes of sandstone, right? If this is supposed to be
exactly, I use the cake analogy as the easiest one. That the creationists will put their little jars, and Kent Hovind will do this, and they're told the thing, and they'll shake it up, and there they can make the little layers. Okay, how does it turn into rock? You can have your bloody cake ingredients, and you can do all you like to put it in the microwave and set it for 85 or raise the temperature to 10,000 degrees. No matter what you do, some things take time. You can't speed up the process. And so and the pyramids, those are another beautiful example, because those have all those cute little foraminifera in them from the limestone that was, they literally are fossils of the previous life.
The time period too. I took Egyptology as an elective when in my undergraduate education, and got to know that timeline decently well. And the amount of squeezing that you're having to do if you're talking about like a 4,400 years ago, right? Flood.
Yeah, or actually much less. They're squeezing it down to only a few centuries because they have constraints that eventually they start bumping into historical records that are, right. And the Egyptians weren't noticing. Go figure.
No, and not only were the Egyptians not noticing, but they had an enormous, corvée laborer population to help build 3 massive superstructures amongst the mastabas, amongst the necropolis.
Bingo.
Yeah, and the Chinese don't care. They're loving their dynasty.
Oh, I bet you're going to love the Messinian salinity crisis stuff, because we have a whole bunch in there on the Nile.
Who
and
needs
it's not
a Mediterranean anyways?
This was a thing that I knew about, the Messinian salinity crisis, and I'd even had a reference on it in my old book from like 2004, just as a brief little blip. But so I now, for the new book, I caught up, and Jackson knows exactly how much red text was in that chapter that I added on
a little bit.
Because I discovered that the technical literature had expanded, ballooning in the last 10 years or so, to where they realized there were various zones and layers and things in the Mediterranean. And there's a whole slew of rivers all around the Mediterranean that have these incised canyons, Grand Canyon style, as the water level dropped down and down and down. And the Nile was one of them. That originally, that if you had been in the early stages after the Mediterranean refill, before that actually finished, you would have had an estuary, as that canyon hadn't been filled up with silt yet, that went 1,200 miles into Egypt. It is absolutely an amazing thing. And that all of what we see now as the boring flat Nile is infill over the last 4 or 5 million years.
It's absolutely incredible. The gymnastics that have to go down for any given civilization. I mean, here you've got the global flood.
Olympian style.
Göbekli Tepe is sitting
Oh,
there
yeah.
unscathed.
And they always leave out the Native Americans. We've got a thing where the creationist is caught on implying, without realizing that he is, that a whole mountain range, I think the Santa Ynez, is being pushed up in like a few centuries, and that simultaneously the Native Americans, waiting for the sea levels to drop in this instantaneous ice age so they can get across the Bering Strait, then go on a beeline to fill out the entire American continent in the course of like a century.
And then
What's wrong with this picture?
It just, you know, I have no idea, you know, and Jackson and I have talked about this previously. We mentioned it last time on our stream, but you know, how much is good faith acting and how much of it is delusion and how much of it is intentional? You know, I have no idea.
Well, I'll give you my take from my source methods approach, because remember, theoretically, when you look at people, what they write, what they're getting the sources from, do they fact check and stuff? No, they don't fact check. That you can peek under the hood and see what's going on in their heads. What you see are relatively few manipulatively dishonest creationists, as in like 5 or 10 maybe, who are trying to make an apologetic case. Philip Johnson has been caught doing this kind of stuff. Andrew Snelling has been caught doing some of this stuff where it's the ... ellipsis that you realize, uh-oh, what are they leaving out? Since they deliberately left it out, they must have known it was there to leave out, right?
I think one's name rhymes with Schmidt Belovend.
Yeah. Well, Hovind,
insignificant
Hovind
Floridan
is
man.
a different character altogether. Kent Hovind is the worst of bottom-feeding parasites. He has not had an original thought in his entire life. Everything he says is stuff he's copied from other creationists. 100%. I know of no counterexample. And most of it is extremely old material from the 1980s and 1990s that he then recycles and retreads down the road. Did you catch my video that I did on his bird evolution thing?
No, but I saw Dapper Dino do a debate with him months ago.
If you know where my link is for the debate I had with Hovind, you can
Right.
follow up, because I insisted that the link to my discussion was in there. And the
Okay.
point is, here was the point. You're familiar with Harun Yahya, the Turkish creationist?
Yeah.
Okay, that's who Kent Hovind was copying.
Oh my God.
Paragraph on paragraph, an entire section, page after page after page, verbatim, down to the brackets and the ... dots and everything else, was copied straight out of Harun. I call him Harun Yahya. And the fun part was, Kent was so lazy that he copies all this stuff manually into his PowerPoints. He said he did it personally. And he therefore encountered, not only when he copied it in, but when he read it online, words that he didn't bother to check up to find out what they meant. He hit the word lacustrine, and he had no clue what it was. So he never bothered.
I think I remember you talking about this actually at some point, because I feel like I have a memory of you.
Yeah, I discussed it in one of my own videos
Or
where I
in Anti-Ornithines.
and that was literally maybe like a month or two before I had my debate with Kent. So it was just really fresh in my mind. I couldn't resist dealing with it, because it was a pure example of his parasitism. But if you look up almost everything Kent ever puts up, especially if he makes the mistake of putting up a slide with a name on it, you will discover that has been nicked from some other creationist, usually Walt Brown. That's his go-to oracle.
And the weird thing is too, is that I don't even think that he's fully into the whole hydroplate hypothesis deal. Like, he's got his whole Hovind hypothesis.
Oh, the Hovind theory, which is basically warmed over ice canopy.
Yeah.
This is from a guy, Patterson or whatever his name was. I knew that intimately. Here's a walk down memory lane. When I was in high school, this would have been 67, 68. That dates me. Yipes, ancient days. Anyway, I had a very entertaining and magnificent teacher in physics, but I think he was kind of a closet creationist, because he suddenly, out of the blue, had a thing where he stopped the regular lecture and told us about the ice canopy theory and this book that he just read, which was a brand new book at the time. And he never made a big deal out of it. He never mentioned it again. He was never a proselytizer or anything like that. And he was a superb teacher. He and my math professor in high school were both little league guys, both covered in chalk dust, in their little white lab coats. They were like mirror images of one another, and they were at loggerheads because the mathematician kept on saying that physics was merely applied mathematics, and the physicist was saying, no, mathematics is merely the tool of physics. So they were having the thing back and forth. But I learned an awful lot about calculus and all that. But anyway, that's when the material goes back.
Calculus is fun.
The problem with an awful lot of current critics of creationism will be that they won't know about that backstory angle because it's all in print and personal experience. It's not online. And so the job of old farts like me, working with young people like you, is to cross-connect that field, because very few ideas in creationism are original. So the moment you're listening to Kent Hovind prattling on in 2020, no, this is the desiccated remains of old fossilized Kent Hovind from the 1970s and 80s, just repeating the same crap over and over and over and over and over again, and then having the new fossils to be, like Standing for Truth, who are coming in with the same bad method, repeating the newer generation material.
He's like Chancellor Palpatine in the or Emperor Palpatine in the new
yes,
movies, because they've resurrected him and he's just the remains.
Yeah. And so Standing for Truth, he's never had an original thought either. He's just a superficial parasite. He reads a small amount of material and then copies it down.
You know, RJ, I wonder about that, because I think he interprets. I think he has some novel interpretations of data, because he will say, "I think this means this," and it's like, where the frick did you get that idea?
Yeah.
Because it just is.
There are some things sometimes that he'll say, and I'll be like, I've read Replacing Darwin, and it's not from there. So where I've had the displeasure of spending my time reading Replacing Darwin. So
I actually, RJ has also looked at that, because I sent that to him, and we gave it kind of a brief once over, but not super in depth, because I don't think it's very.
I was surprised at how superficial it was.
Right.
Because there were so many creationists who were just lauding this as like the origins of species thing, that this is this monumental masterpiece, and it's basically a slightly inflated post.
Yeah, the thing about it is that it pretty much introduces 1, genetic entropy, 2, flawed mutation rates, and then 3, it proposes that Standing really likes this one. It proposes the idea that transitional fossils or transitional forms are in and of themselves intentional designs.
Yes. Jensen has. We read when we first came across Jensen saying that, I think RJ and I both died a little bit inside.
It's incredible.
It's just that,
and that's putting him at odds. That's putting him at odds. But the thing that we go into, we have our section on baraminology. I think you'll get smiles out of that, because we pulled together more material on baraminology, including stuff on bats and things. It's just absolutely delicious material, and to show how at complete confusion there is in the world of baraminology.
I was going to say, I'm sure all of it is incredibly, definitely not contradicting itself.
What's hilarious?
Like this massive Ouroboros of baraminology consistent.
Well, actually, they are in a terrible mess. For there are 2 really buzzword ones, and they're both due to Todd Wood and his gang. The first one is the horse baramin. That Wood back in 2006 dropped a shoe that reverberates all through the planet by announcing that the every single member of the fossil horse sequence is part of a monobaramin. Not merely a baramin, but a monobaramin, a subset of a hypothetical larger baramin. Now that has produced a certain amount of conniption fits, because there's a group of baraminologists that go, wait a minute, they're kind of okay with Dinohippus and all of that being the same kind. And in fact, the Ark Encounter puts a Dinohippus as the archetypal horse aboard the Ark Encounter. Duh, whoa, amazing. But they don't like Heracitherium, the earlier group, because if they push all the way out to Heracitherium, how are they going to keep them down on the farm when they got Heracitherium in the same baramin? Because Heracitherium and Homogalax are virtually identical, which means you now got tapers, and then Homogalax and Heracitherium is closer to the phenacodonts than it is to equus or tapers, so that means you include the phenacodonts, and then all of the, pretty soon you've got everything that's in Africa practically, all being in the same baramin. So there, I think that's the reason why some of them have drawn the line, no, Heracitherium, we got to keep them out.
Well, I mean, RJ, if they only have to feed one animal on the ark, then that eliminates a lot of problems.
Yeah. Well, at one point we say, why don't you just go whole hog and say that all life is one giant monobaramin?
Yeah,
But
just
the problem,
they just have
we
a
know
single
why.
cell with
We
a
know
single
why.
cell.
Because
Right, with a little
we've got
bacterium
to
in it.
be-
Yeah.
We've got to be a separate species. And that's
Oh,
the thing that produces the awkward problem for all creationist systematics, is that they simultaneously have they've got the double whammy, and we go into this in great detail in the book. First, you've got to have all of the extant organisms are descended from created kinds that were made only 6,000 years ago. No other creation event. Then all of the fossil distribution that went dead in the flood must have been generated from those created kinds in less than 1,500 years. Then you've got all of those created kinds being put on the ark and generating all the extant species diversity in less than 1,500, roughly 1,500 years-ish, when you start looking at it. In fact, I think Christine Janis even made an example, which we quote in the story, where some of them are referred to in certain documents and circumstances.
The Egyptians mention lions and things like that.
So they must have been even faster than that.
And the Romans with the whaling and all that.
So there is a pressure, a selection pressure in the anti-evolutionary Darwinian system to have as few kinds as possible, because the booking space on the ark is limited. So that means that they've been basically abandoning 10,000, 50,000 kind models and whittling it down to like 1,500-ish as the kinds that's the variety that's on the ark encounter. Okay, that's fine. You've now accepted speciation on a colossal scale. Okay.
Such a small period of time.
How then do you keep human beings from not being in the Homo erectus kind, or the Homo habilis kind, or the Australopithecine kind, or for that matter, the Bonzo, the chimp kind? Where exactly do you draw the line if you've got that giant wide marker for everywhere else? And so
I've got your answer, RJ. Cladistic cherry picking.
Oh, and it's even better than that. Have you heard of the term cognitum used in baraminology?
Oh my God. We had a field day with that
You
one.
are going to really love our book. The cognitum is where it's public opinion. And one of the models that creationists use to tweak their kinds is what people think is a kind.
That was the veterinarian lady. Jean Leitner. Yes, yeah. Jean Leitner, because
Are we talking Kent's 5-year-old can tell the difference?
Yes. That's
because you see, this doesn't look. People in one case they explicitly say that their own baraminology tools are grouping groups together as a baramin, but they're refusing to keep them as a baramin because people look at these two different forms and they think they're different.
Right. For example, the cows and goats are both in Bovidae, right? But 5-year-old would say cows and goats are different, so they say the cows and goats are different baramin
based on the cognitum. This is the America's People's Choice Awards of systematics.
Science.
This isn't the People's Choice Awards. This is the Kids' Choice Awards.
We suggest at one point, why not just consult the Ouija board, or something.
The other fun part that we're documenting is the data flushing.
Ask God.
Have you read Evolution Slam Dunk, Erica? Cheap plug.
No, I have not.
You gotta get my book. RJ needs the royalties, and it's really good. Anyway, I went into this M. Aaron, and we still have no clue whether M is a male, a female, what the first name is.
We don't know. It's a mystery. Great, I love it.
At any rate,
mystery Aaron.
He, she, it, they did a thing, the one and only study that anybody has ever tried to do of a therapsid, and they picked an obscure group that's not on the main line of therapsid evolution, and dropped out most of the fossils. You gotta get my book. RJ needs the royalties. They just flush data. Anyway,
Jackson, this reminds me of what Standing did with the ice fish in your conversation with him.
Oh, the fish antifreeze proteins.
He picks like one of the most obscure of the species, the only one of the group.
I remember because. Fun fact, RJ and I wrote about it, which is why it was on my mind, because
George so fresh in our heads
about it. The Zoarcid ice fish. They duplicated this gene for but they duplicated this gene that was involved in that had a minor role in antifreeze, and
Right,
so
yeah.
Georgia Purdom was like, it doesn't matter because they already had this role and they were just expanding it. But Standing picked that one because there are no creationists who discuss notothenioid ice fish, and
Yeah.
I knew it when I
Yeah,
had him
we
in
covered
that
the
moment.
entire range of the various fish antifreeze
But
protein
also,
examples in the new book.
What Mel said. Does that what does that mean for time, Mel?
Oh, well, we've been on for an hour and 15 minutes. We obviously have slipped along on that. If anybody is bored, we can pull it up, but I think I'm enjoying the conversation. What do you think?
Oh, I mean, I don't know what
Yeah.
Mel also does. Mel
And it's
has a
very
job
late
and
for you.
stuff too, so-
Erica, by the way, you are welcome on our show any old time. You are absolutely delightful.
Yes, I probably should go, unfortunately, because I have class at 10 and it's like 4:50.
Oh, sleep. Yes, there you go. Anyway, so we'll pull the thing up on that. Everybody remember to get Evolution Slam Dunk. You can get it through Amazon. You can get it on ebooks, all the different formats on there.
Hey, I'm convinced, RJ. I'm gonna buy it.
And then
Erica,
hopefully within the next month, we will then have volume 1 of The Rocks Were There out. And the rest of the creationist community will be as annoyed as all the people who aren't noticing Evolution Slam
Please
Dunk.
tell, before I go, tell me that that's a response to You Weren't There. The rocks were there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah.
love it.
Exactly. I thought it was the absolutely perfect thing because, we don't have to worry about, I wasn't there, but the rocks were there.
Yeah, they were always there. And they'll
And it's a comprehensive work that covers virtually all. We're dismantling 4 Answers in Genesis books in detail.
Oh
and
God, are they
all of the
Answers in
various
Genesis books?
intelligent designers and others that are kind of circulating around a lot of these arguments. So it's everything from
I
orphan
bought all
genes
4
and
of them.
catastrophism and oh gosh, it's just a cornucopia of material. We've been having a fabulous amount of time working on the damn thing.
I can't believe you made me think about my debate with Standing for Truth. How dare you?
Yeah,
No.
so I want to get everybody armed with the reptile mammal transition data in that because it's a slam dunk. And it's one that literally you'll know every possible counter argument because I've covered all. There's only about 20 people that have actually bumped into the reptile mammal transition from the anti-evolution point of view. And it includes Dwayne Gish and Philip Johnson Time. Yes. Okay. So we will see you all next week. Happy joy. Thanks for coming on the show, Erica. Don't accept any wooden penguins and see you next week.
Fun thing is, if I get up early enough, I can catch RJ. So
Yeah.
I wake up early.
Oh yeah, I generally, unless I have something important to do that I have a particular time frame for, my normal body clock thing, I'm a night owl.